see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'm wanting to welcome you to our dialogues on how to build a culture of empathy and compassion. And today we're here with Jannet Leggett, and she's the founder of Canadians for Compassion. And would you like to just introduce yourself a little bit, Jannet, and tell me a little bit about yourself?
Certainly, Edwin, and thanks very much. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. I am actually a lawyer. I came from a compliance background in government compliance law, and I got inspired by the work of Karen Armstrong and the Charter for Compassion, and decided that I would launch a campaign in Canada to have Canada become a country of compassion and empathy. So developed a website and mobile application and a number of different initiatives to help promote the idea of empathy and compassion, not just at the national level, but at the very personal level and reaching out to the regional level.
Why did you kind of get started with this project? Like, what are you seeing as the problems in society that you're wanting to address?
Well, I think we all know, or those of us who believe in empathy and compassion and the need for it, know that we are wired for compassion. But we get so distracted by everything that's going on in our lives. They're very, very busy that sometimes we don't realize or we're not mindful about the ongoing need for compassion on a daily basis. So the idea about setting out a call or creating more awareness for the need for compassion in our society, what I'm hoping to do is actually raise the awareness for people to live in a compassionate way to all living things on an ongoing basis, not just at Christmas time when, you know, the calls go out to please donate to this or please donate to that, that it actually becomes a part of their everyday way of life.
Okay, so it's like society is kind of like maybe has compassion on Christmas and some maybe when there's a big disaster, but maybe we need a little bit compassion, you know, on an ongoing daily basis.
I had a wonderful way that I've heard it expressed came from Reverend Rick Matthews, who runs a shelter in Vancouver's Lower East Side, one of the few shelters that does not have any limitations for who it can receive in. So he truly is an example of living compassion on a daily basis in one of the most desperate areas of Canada. And what he said is that we need to move away from this idea of charity, which is a very unidirectional approach to caring for other people. You know, I'm a have and I will take care of you or I'll do this. And instead, which doesn't really engage people or individuals in the discussion of what is really needed and what would really be helpful. And his alternative was mutuality, which to me is the cornerstone of empathy and compassion. It's not just it going one way, and it's in fact actually being present for that individual and hearing their stories, hearing their needs, and then together coming up with an idea or a strategy to help make the situation better for them, and also receiving the benefit of that process as well.
I'm kind of getting over a cold here, so sorry for the cough.
I feel great empathy and compassion. You, Ed.
I definitely need it. It's actually gotten a little bit of bronchitis, so
oh dear.
I'm taking some not penicillin, but antibiotics. So yeah, so I saw the talk that he gave. I think he gave a talk in Vancouver or someplace or Seattle.
That's right.
And
both of us.
Oh yeah, it was both of you gave that talk, and I thought he really kind of spoke to that quality of people kind of connecting, and it's like you know, typically it's like, oh, we'll give a little money to the poor, or you know, it's kind of like a little bit of pity, looking down, you know, going to help you out. And he just really talked about that quality of connecting, you know, and kind of mutual kind of seeing. Yeah, that was a really great talk.
I spoke to, when I started Canadians for Compassion, I went and spoke to a lot of people who work on the front lines with individuals who either by chance or circumstance or by decision are doing their best to get through this life, but are doing a lot of it on the street. And, the feedback coming back is that we don't need another shelter. We don't need another food bank or another, line. Just, we feel like we're being cattle, being shuttled from one, handout to another. What we really want is that we want a sacred space where we can, well, you will listen to us, where we can tell our stories about why we're here and what it is like. And if you listen to us, we can trust you. And if we can trust you, then together we can come up with a solution as to how to, on a sustainable level, fix the issue that has contributed to so much disparity in our society. And it is one of the reasons why I started Canadians for Compassion, was to actually broaden the opportunities for discussion about what really is compassion. What does it mean to each of us individually? Where do we see it functioning well, either in our families, in our relationships, in our workplaces, in our schools, in business, in government? And where could we do more of it? What could we do to improve on that in areas where we don't see it? And this whole idea of a discussion that brings in the aspect of mutuality really honors each person. And this is why I think it is so important, this concept of mutuality, this concept of compassion or empathy. As you know, Edwin, the actual definition of compassion, comes, from the word passion, which means to suffer, and calm to means to suffer with. It's not about saying, oh, I already have my list of donations I've given this week, so I'm going to walk by you, and not only walk by you, but rationalize my decision to ignore your need or your cry for help and make some sort of judgment as to why you are there and how I shouldn't enable that. That whole discussion and thinking has to end. We really need to see everybody in ourselves and ourselves in everybody, and get past that point of judgment to a place where we're really working together to help all people be raised up and feel loved and supported.
So it sounds like the real problem is kind of like this alienation between people, and maybe judgment is like part of that alienation. Kind of like,
I think it's also fear, Edwin. And when I was listening to Dr. Matthews speak, it's, when someone is, off their medication, and we're not just talking about, people who live on the street. We need compassion for animals. We need compassion within our food supply. We need compassion for the environment. But specifically when we're dealing with individuals who, who are on the street, and they may be in very, very desperate condition, they may be quite frightening to someone who's never been exposed to that. So I think it's not fair to just say it's judgment. Sometimes, and understandably, it is fear, and you may not know how to deal with that situation. But that's not every situation. And it's extraordinary when you stop to talk to someone, not just throw money in a cap or, or walk by, just to talk to them and listen to their story, how that can be helpful to them. So even if their experience remains where it is, someone listened to them at that moment, and that moment can be transformative.
So what I'm kind of looking at is, how do we build a culture of empathy and compassion? So kind of trying to get basically a blueprint kind of laid out for that, and this is part of my exploration for doing that. So what I'm hearing from you is the importance of hearing everyone's story as kind of maybe a first step.
Yes, and for those who are in settings where they have the capacity to do more, either financially or organizationally, to perhaps get involved in stakeholder groups or in organizations, and having a discussion about what can we do to actually support this process so that we're also contributing to meaningful change.
Okay, so we're going to listen to people's stories, and that we're going to start organizing to do something about this. Is that kind of what I'm hearing, to build a culture of compassion?
A large part of the Compassionate Cities campaign, which are happening all around the world, a lot of that, which all originated out of Seattle, as you probably know, through the International Institute of Compassionate Cities, as well as the Compassion Action Network, of which Canadians for Compassion also participates, was the idea within each city there is a Compassion Action Committee that talks about what can we do in our community, who should we have around that table for the discussion about what is needed in our community, and what would it look like if we were more a compassionate city or a compassionate community. And so it's really a domino effect. The more cities and communities you have discussing what is compassion and having dialogue about that, the more change is happening, and you get enough cities, enough communities, enough universities, enough businesses, all having these dialogues at the various strata of their responsibility or impact in a community, the more you're actually positively affecting that community. And then it grows, and then it's national.
Yeah, as I've been asking people about what we can do to build a culture of empathy and compassion, it seems that like one of the first steps is really starting a dialogue about it.
Yes.
It's like getting people talking, kind of raise that dialogue within society, and it sounds like that's really what you're working on.
Absolutely. And the important thing too is to have people at the table that really have the wherewithal to make effective change. So, when I have discussions with universities or faculties of law, the discussion is how can we incorporate or cultivate compassion in the exercise of the law. So the introduction of restorative justice as a technique that can be employed by lawyers so that when there are disputes, the litigants don't end up having to spend an awful lot of money in court and go down that whole long stream and ultimately not feel any justice was served. So it's based on Aboriginal traditions for alternative dispute resolution, but effectively what it does is it actually helps mitigate some of the horrible stress that surrounds any kind of litigation, and helps people get to a solution more quickly and equitably. So that's an example of how there might be discussion about building a culture of empathy and compassion in the context of the law. When we talk about education, the same dialogue can be happening in the context of education. And then in the context of business and politics, the same thing can happen. So my suggestion is that we look at this laterally as well as holistically, because I think within each strata of our culture, the discussion may change a bit, but ultimately what comes out of that can contribute to a more holistic approach.
Yeah, so it's like transforming all the different social institutions so that they're more supportive of these values.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And kind of engage the stakeholders within those organizations in the dialogue, maybe.
Yes, a large part of our focus is in education. His Holiness the Dalai Lama mentioned that the best way to create a culture of empathy and compassion is to start with young children as early as possible. So there is a Toronto woman, Erin Henry, who developed a children's charter for compassion, and we have worked to get that introduced into the curriculum of schools. And it's being adopted actually around the world, in Ireland, the Netherlands. It's being translated into over 30 languages. So the whole idea is that if you create a culture of empathy and compassion within the school environment, issues of bullying, racism, sexism, and all the issues the isms that are now plaguing schools right now, they go away because everyone is now thinking in a very positive and a mutual way that we are each going to treat one another as we would want to be treated. And within that culture, we will help each other. And as those young people grow up, obviously they are informing our future culture of empathy and compassion.
I'm just kind of wondering what sort of roadblocks are you coming up or obstacles in this effort?
From the standpoint of the education, or just
for all of it? It's like you're a real organizer in Canada. You're probably the premier main organizer for the Charter for Compassion for Canada, and so you've done like trips across the country,
Sure.
and so you've really been kind of been where the metaphor of the rubber hits the road, and you've really seen what's kind of going on. And I'm just wondering, what are kind of the, the blocks that you've been seeing, so the problems for kind of getting this out there?
Yes. Uh, well, one can always fall back on funding. One can always say if I had, if there were more funding or if we had a strong funding partner, we could do more. Uh, what I have found in my travels is that there are so many people on individual levels that are doing amazing work. Just an interesting side story. When I first thought about the idea of creating a national network via the internet, via our mobile application, via our Canadian tour and the documentary we're filming, when we were starting to organize that, I thought, well, before I do that, let's see if somebody else is doing this right now. And I spoke with some major institutions that represent compassion and peace in Canada. But what I found was that what they were doing, their activity was very siloed. So one organization might be dealing just with encouraging peace. One might be working on food banks. One might be working on taking care of animals. Some very, very successful thing was happening it might be happening in, say, Yellowknife, which is in the Arctic, Canadian Arctic, whereas someone else in Victoria might be doing something in nonviolent communication. But no one knew what each was doing, and no one knew how to find one another. So I think one of the major roadblocks is, and what I'm trying to address through our website and our activity, is actually opening up the network, actually creating a centralized network where people can find out what is happening right across the country, can contact one another, and also share their own personal stories about what's happening in their community and make a difference. And I think the more people are aware of compassionate activity going on and are more aware of how they can get involved, I think the more we are able to create that culture of empathy and compassion without the funding. Funding is important, but we need the impetus first.
Yeah, with the funding part, somehow I see in society that it's like, oh, the professions, teaching, healthcare, nursing, and these programs that, nonprofits that kind of are out in the community doing community work. There's almost like this sense that, oh, they don't need money. There's something within society that is the money doesn't need to flow there for some reason. It's like they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart, so they don't need money. We can spend, $1 trillion on war but we don't need to spend any money on empathy and compassion. I mean, that's like an exaggeration. But so it seems to be that this is a real problem of priorities or something within society.
Well, and you are likely aware that there's a lot of research happening right now with respect to how living in a culture that lacks empathy and compassion actually contributes to illness, and that and you think of all of the wonderful, brave men and women that are coming back from representing both of our countries in wars, not just recently, but in time immemorial, and all suffering horrendously from post-traumatic stress disorder, to the fact that the rate of death is greater after these young men and women come back due to suicide and other conditions, because they come back and there isn't that society of compassion or empathy to honor them and recognize them and assist them in their transition back into, normal society, for lack of a better term. So if we could create a greater culture of compassion in society, I think, and have that being integrated into our healthcare system, as well as other systems, we'd actually have less illness. Less money would be required for supporting healthcare and social services, and our society would prosper. Notwithstanding your very valid argument that there have been decisions made by both of our governments that the investment needs to be in national security, and therefore very much in going across the sea and to other lands and defending democracy in those places, where for the same amount of money we could eradicate poverty. We could provide education to those who don't have it. We could be creating such a society of compassion and empathy, not just in North America, but around the world, that perhaps the wars that we're now fighting wouldn't be necessary, or at least not to the extent that they seem to continue.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is that we have a problem with funding, and people, the putting money into empathy and compassion pays off, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all these problems that can be solved, that we're going to save money in the long term around that. Mm-hmm. And then the second point that you made previously is, I was hearing, is that there's all these organizations working around empathy and compassion, but they're not like working together. They're kind of like siloed. And there's this need for them to kind of come together around these values and to see how, you know, that they're all interrelated and they can support each other by organizing around those values.
Mm-hmm. Very true, very much so. You know, we were talking about roadblocks earlier, and one of the first questions I always get whenever I speak with the mayor of a municipality about becoming a compassionate city is, what will this cost us? You know, we don't want to support anything which will cost more money to our municipality, because we already have so much money that has to be set aside for social services and that sort of thing. Where you have, and my response to that is where you have an engaged population, and I'm not talking just about the actual voters, but education, businesses, and the like, engaged in creating a community of more empathy and compassion. The draw is not from the municipal government, because the resources come from the community, and the community thrives because it's engaged in such activity. A really good example of that comes from a one-woman organization based out of Yellowknife. It's called Food Share. And this woman 11 years ago was sitting in a room listening to these various social agencies talking about how they could help the homeless, the Aboriginal First Nations peoples, youth, at-risk youth that are living on the street, if only there was good and sufficient food. And without spending a dime of her own money or taking an income in the 11 or so years, she has actually gone to local businesses and restaurants to actually gather the food. The local electrical company provides the electrical supply without charging any money. A company that's involved in building shelters basically built the office where they could stand. The city waived the needs to pay taxes on the land. The whole community got together behind this, each contributing their own resources. And from that, they now have a very, very valuable program that last year distributed over 200,000 pounds of not only just canned food, but fresh food, fresh fruits and vegetables, dairy products, as well as other foodstuffs. And you don't hear about this happening in a lot of communities. So, and there's an example of not requiring more funding, but just engaging a community in the spirit of empathy and compassion to help those who don't have those resources.
So around that, one idea I had is for this conference on how can we build a culture of empathy and compassion. And right now I'm kind of starting it up online. But it seems to me that that's something that every city kind of needs, is like a conference to just bring the community together to start that dialogue, and that the dialogue itself becomes like an engine for some of these transformations to happen. So
exactly. That's what we're doing actually in the cities, the various cities that are now active in their compassionate city campaigns. And there are about 11 of them in Canada right now. First of all, let's get people around the table to start having a discussion about what would a compassionate, say for instance, London, what would a compassionate London look like? And let everyone contribute ideas about what would be really valuable to have in the community. And just pick one idea, start with one idea and make it happen. And when that succeeds, then the community can see that this is something worthwhile investing in, and then another idea can come. Last night I was speaking at a conference in London, Ontario about, they've developed this city symposium, and the theme is Be Creative, Do Good. And they have various people from the community talking about various ideas they have to make the city more compassionate. And one of the discussions that came up was community gardens, so that people can contribute to growing food supply, foodstuffs that can be shared with others, so that those who may not necessarily have a good income to afford good quality produce, bless you, bless you,
Thanks. Sorry.
can actually get involved in this at a reasonable rate, and then they are providing good quality food to their own families. So, you know, it's like picking an idea that will work for their community and going with it.
Okay, so now this is how I'm seeing it. Is we start the dialogue, and out of this dialogue, these community dialogues, all these initiatives kind of start taking place.
Yes.
So the other question that I kind of look at is intention. Like, I have an intention to build a culture of empathy and compassion, and you have that intention. It's like we're pretty hardcore, around that, right? It's like, how do we...
C.
What?
Big C, compassion.
Big C, big E, big C over here. So
whatever that would look like, big E.
Oh yeah, we have to get the sign, kind of our signs here. It's like, how do we create that intention in the community? It's like, what is it that creates that intention? It seems like, you're talking a little bit about, city officials. Well, maybe they'll get the intention, because like, oh, the community, it's the community, it'll help the community, or you know what I mean? It's like, what is that, and how do you get the people to really grab a hold of it?
It's a good question. You can see intention in action or leadership. I think another word is leadership for intention, because the question is always like, what can one person do? So here are these two hardcore compassionistas, trying to get everybody else to rally around this idea, and it becomes, infectious, contagious. People want to be part of something that actually is going to help make the world a better place. But it always comes back down to leadership on a personal level, and how do you inspire others to take a leadership role within their own lives to do more. And I see it in all different walks of life. There's a wonderful YouTube presentation of the new mayor of St. Louis, whose whole platform was run on empathy and compassion. And his whole message to the community was, we need to live and create and work together to develop a community of compassion so that everyone can benefit. To me, that's a wonderful example of how, even at a municipal level, at a political level, someone can take a leadership position so that the intention that they feel becomes contagious and gets shared and felt by everyone in the community. Barack Obama did the same thing in terms of running on his campaign on compassion. So that's a level, a very, very high level of political leadership. I think on a personal level, I think when someone sees someone doing something, it gets them to start thinking about what they could be doing. So just by the virtue of taking the initiative and going forward and doing it, it will be noticed, and you'll start attracting other people who also feel that they should be doing something more meaningful and more contributory in their society, and then that will get going. So I think it's about action is the way of building on intention.
So as you and I take action, as others start taking action, by taking action, it's like we're leading, we're doing some yes. work, and then people just see that action happening, and then there's a desire. It's kind of like a modeling, right? You have to kind of model it, and then people can join in that intention. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of how it works? You see it working?
Yes, I don't know if yourself or your audience knows, there's a YouTube video right now called, I think it's called Man Dancing on the Hill, or Leadership. And it's about this man at a concert, and he's all by himself on this hill, dancing like a wild and crazy guy. And at first, people are just looking at him like he's crazy. But then a second person joins them, and that person starts dancing. And then a third person joins the two. And the commentary from along the way as this is happening, because ultimately what happens is basically a whole crowd of people join that man on the hill, and then everyone's dancing. Is that leadership is not just the one person dancing on the hill, it's the second person that actually joins that person that is the most important leadership step. And then the third person actually joins them, and then the whole process gets transformed, because then you start having a critical mass, and then everybody wants to join on. So maybe it's just about losing our fear of being that fool dancing on the hill, because in fact someone else will get the idea and then join us, and then we create the momentum of intention that results in real and significant change happening in our society.
Yeah, I saw that video. I posted it to my Facebook because I actually said, "Hey, this is how leadership works, folks." So that was really, excuse me, really good.
We have it on our YouTube channel too. We have a YouTube channel, Canadians for Compassion, and it's there as well as the mayor of St. Louis making his speech on compassion. So if you want to try and find it, Edwin, you can find it on our YouTube channel.
Okay, since we're talking about your website, Canadians for Compassion, I have it up here.
Oh, okay.
And I just brought it up on the screen, and we see here at the top of the screen it has we could maybe do a little tour of your site, and I just brought it up. It says Map of Compassion, and I'm seeing little red dots around, so perhaps we can just walk through some of the links on your website.
Yes, that sounds fine. Yeah, what those pins are, and I don't know, can you see anything scrolling around the website? I guess you can't because I'm scrolling around on my own. If you actually scrolled your cursor over any one of those pins, up would come the identity of someone who has done an act of compassion. So one of the things that we wanted to do in terms of building a culture of compassion in Canada was to create a way where people could share their stories of compassion, whether they received it, experienced it, or whether they were compassionate to someone else. And you can actually do it online by becoming a member, which is free of charge. And then under your profile, you can share an act of compassion. Or if you have an iPhone or iPad, you can download the Compassion app, which allows you to actually record that, do it on your handheld device. And when that happens, these red pins show up on the map of Canada on our website. So those pins are all acts of compassion that people have shared or experienced in the recent past.
And I see you have a little recent video that kind of explains the process.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, this video, just explains how it works.
Oh, and I see that you have a list here, latest acts of compassion, a little bit like a Twitter feed or something like that kind of pops up.
Absolutely. Sorry, I just had to take care of a phone call that was coming in the background. Yes, what we've done is we've created a way using our website so that acts or conversations of compassion, bless you, that are coming from all kinds of different sources, whether it's sharing it on Twitter, whether it's on Facebook, whether it comes through from submitting a compassion act, are all streamed live onto the website. So the whole idea is that however one experiences it or wants to share their story, this goes onto our website, so anyone on our website will get on very, very live ideas and things that are happening right across the country in compassion, and they can follow the story as it's emerging.
Okay, so I'm looking at the sidebar here. Do you want to? Is there any of these links that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I think there's the Compassionate City campaigns will give you an idea of some of the cities. If you look down the left-hand side of the margin, you will see some of the cities that are now very, very much involved in compassionate activities right across the country. It's very exciting because they're literally going from sea to sea. And you can click on any particular location and get a story about what's happening in their neighborhood and what they've done recently. And then there's also contact information.
Oh, so you have organizers in each city who are kind of organizing these campaigns?
Yes, and what we're doing is we're creating a national um, group where everybody who's involved in the Compassionate City campaign, we get together on Skype and have a sort of a monthly think tank right across the country about what's happening in our country about compassion, what's happening in local communities, and how can we do more to get more people engaged on a national level for a discussion on compassion and how we get that happening more in our country.
Well, perhaps we can get these organizations or some of the leaders from them to be on some panel discussions too for our conference.
Yes,
I think that
absolutely.
would be great.
Absolutely. There's also compassion and education, and if you click on that, you'll have an introduction to the Children's Charter for Compassion, as well as the YouTube link to the children of University Heights Public School, which is the first school in the world to affirm the Children's Charter of Compassion and become a compassionate school. So this is where this school has 250 students that originate from over 50 different countries in the world and speak as many languages. But it became the theme of the school that month to learn about compassion. And they did amazing projects around what does compassion mean to you. And they did a whole concert series with music and performance. And then at the end of it, they all affirmed the charter, the Children's Charter for Compassion. It really, really was very, very beautiful and moving.
So, yeah, I see a video there. Did you shoot?
That's right.
Did you
Yes.
tape that?
Yes, we did. Yes.
And I see they even have T-shirts too, compassion
Yes,
T-shirts.
we do have merchandise. So if you talk about, again, how to build a movement for compassion, you need to find a way to generate revenue. So we sell T-shirts, and we actually sell blocks of Canada where you can sponsor the administrative costs for Charter for Compassion by actually purchasing a brick of compassion. And you'll find that on the home page. So.
Oh, great. Yeah, well, it's like we were talking about. It takes, it takes resources to make all this happen, and we definitely need more.
Yes. So if you're back on the main screen, I'm not sure where you are, and it says help pave the way to compassion.
Okay.
So if you click on that, you're taken to another map of Canada, and you'll see those little bricks where someone can actually load up their profile or just anonymously buy a brick of Canada. And if you're a corporate sponsor, you can actually purchase several bricks, as the Hall did, to show their sponsorship for the whole process. So we think this is really, really exciting because it's a way for people to sort of stake out their part of Canada where they want to sponsor compassion, and then their profile is right there.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot of creative ideas to, yeah, it takes that to kind of engage people to just keep trying different things, to kind of get the word out there.
It's all about the conversation, the discussion, isn't it? So just as you're doing all this wonderful work and doing interviews and filming discussion with people, it's all about the engagement in the discussion of what is empathy, what is compassion. And you have enough people doing that, and it becomes part of it becomes part of our zeitgeist at this time. It becomes part of who we are and our national identity, and then we won't settle for less. So we need to just keep talking and keep doing things and keep recognizing people who are doing work to contribute and support empathy and compassion, and the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah, so that's what I'm seeing is the first part is like this dialogue that we're getting started, and this is part of it, what we're doing right now. And then, but out of the dialogue, we also need to have I don't know if arguments, but it's the way to respond and to guide or address people's concerns, because they hear all the time like, oh, empathy is weak. Empathy is just emotionalism. It's, really, it's feminine. We don't, for men, we don't want to be empathic. So there's all these kind of concerns that come up, or concern like, oh, the real nature of people is greed and competition. It's survival of the fittest. And it seems like in the dialogue, we need to kind of start articulating responses to those type of comments.
Yes. Well, you know, I think one of the important stakeholders in this whole discussion is business. And it's what I find very exciting, what's happening now in certain business circles, is the idea of compassion being a feature of good leadership. So TED.com features speakers like Teng Chen from Google. And they basically talk about how they've created a culture of empathy and compassion in their own business, within their business environment, and where the actual business encourages their employees to get involved in activities in the community that actually helps make the community better. And what they're finding is that the level of leadership, the quality of employee, the actual work environment is enhanced and improved as a result of this. And so they're making a case that creating a culture of empathy and compassion in business is actually good for business. It actually makes a business more profitable. So if you extrapolate that into society, then you have a strong case beyond the emotional and the soft feminine side of empathy and compassion. And you can see that actually strategically it makes sense. There's a wonderful segment from the film. I just saw it again, A Beautiful Mind. That film featuring Russell Crowe as the individual that has a mental breakdown. And forgive me, I don't remember the name of the Nobel Prize winner who devised this economic mathematical formula. But the message was simply this: his comrades were all talking about trying to get the girl, and they were all sort of planning their own strategies about how they individually would try and knock out the competition to get the girl that they want. And the revelation that came to this man, which was the basis of his theory that won the Nobel Prize, is that if we cooperate together and are willing to sacrifice a little bit of our self-interest in favor of a better good, then we all collectively do much better than if we choose this approach of just dog eat dog or competing to get the best for ourselves. And I've taken that message into the whole discussion about empathy and compassion, about the fact that if we think in terms of mutuality, if we think in terms of actually giving some of ourselves and contributing to a greater good, overall, not only do I benefit, so does everyone else. And you can apply that to our economy, we can apply it to social programs, we can apply it to every strata of our society. And I think that's a very strong message to take home to all those who might say that this is about, wearing, the 60s, right, about love, peace, man. And there's a very strong case to be made that from a society and an economic viability standpoint, we need compassion and empathy now more than ever.
Yeah, there is. This is maybe a topic for another time, but in terms, there is this notion of self-sacrifice for empathy and compassion, and I think at some point I'd really like to maybe explore that in real depth, because I see you can kind of go beyond that to I think the person you were talking about that gave that talk, that man.
Rick Matthews.
Whereas when you start seeing our common humanity, it's almost as if we transcend that giving up part of ourselves.
Yes.
That it's like we're kind of seeing the humanity of someone else, and they're seeing the humanity in us, and it's almost it's really as if we have a shared being. And I've interviewed Marco Iacoboni, who talks about mirror neurons. And he's talking about that is really the reality that we have, we don't have these separate realities, really, that our realities are really intertwined. So anyway, I don't want to go into that too much, but I think that's a longer kind of a discussion.
Oh, I heard something that I keep with me all the time is I was listening to a Hopi healer. He was one of the grandfathers in Arizona, and he said there's a saying of our people called "In la Ka'esh," which means "I am another you." And I think if all of us understood in Lakaesh, I am another you, we would look at each other very, very differently. Even someone that perhaps is not being so nice to us at the time, if we saw them as another of us, and we've had bad days and we have done things that perhaps is not the best representation of who we really wish to be, what we need at that time is perhaps some tolerance, some understanding, maybe some boundary setting, but certainly empathy and compassion.
Yeah, that's great. I'm looking forward to a further discussion. We can have more discussions going into the nuances of all these different topics. I did want to continue with your website. Was there more that you wanted to share about that?
Let me just...
We have Home, Learn, Share, Act, members, partners, compassionate city campaigns, education, I Am tour.
Maybe well, I think... Yes.
Oh, just
the I Am tour?
Yeah, is that that was a tour you did?
Yes, we started that off. Again, it's all about this dialogue, about having a dialogue for compassion. And what I'm doing is I am recruiting graduate film students from across the country to take me into their communities, and we interview people from all walks of life, from the homeless to First Nations people to elected officials, the heads of universities and schools, to people we just meet on the street, and asking the question, what is compassion? What would a compassionate community look to you, and where do you see it happening? And we're meeting some phenomenal Canadians doing wonderful work. And we always ask the question, who in your community do you think really exemplifies compassion? And so it's a Canadian thing, you know. So many of our inspiring Canadians have all done it by either walking or wheelchairing, like taking their wheelchair across the country, or running on one leg, or driving, or riding a cycle. There's something about the Canadian identity where we need to go from sea to sea and up into the Arctic to really say that, you know, we're Canadian as part of that experience. So this is what we're doing. The Compassion I Am tour started off last year, and to basically start from the central part of Canada and go out west and then go up into the Western Arctic. So in the span of about 4 weeks, we traveled 20,000 kilometers and spoke with hundreds of people, which we are now filming and also doing a companion book to.
Oh, wow, I see that. Yeah, from Vancouver to the Arctic. I'm just kind of going over the map here.
Yes. Actually, when I sort of put a pin on each part of Canada, the major cities and places where I wanted to go, and looked at how the tour might actually fold, it looks like the Mobius curve, which is the structure of the Canadians for Compassion logo and the logo for the Charter for Compassion. So I thought that was kind of cool. Mm-hmm. It wasn't intentional, but that's basically how it's working out.
Okay. So when was that tour? That was last year?
That was last year, and now we're in the process of actually getting a pre-production finance, a pre-production licensing, so that we can continue the rest of the tour through Eastern Canada and up into the Eastern Arctic. So right now we're in discussions with a number of documentary companies to get the final part of this filming completed, so we can get the documentary out there.
Oh, great! And you have some trailers too online.
Yes, you can see the trailer of basically a 3-minute clip of our tour of Western Canada.
Okay. Any other parts of the site?
Let me think. I'm just looking down at our website.
Partners, members.
There's still a lot to do. The partners page is still under a work in process. What our partners will be ultimately will be partners in education, where we'll be featuring our work with, you know, the heads of universities or high schools. There's a big movement in Canada right now to stop bullying, because a young gay boy committed suicide because he was a 16-year-old young boy, very, very talented, but terribly ostracized and mistreated by his classmates. He ended up committing suicide. So there's a huge movement in high schools regarding anti-bullying. So here we're trying to create a national dialogue about the need for compassion in high schools for people of all, different ways of life or lifestyles and that sort of thing. So we would have a partner for compassion in education, for example. We're having partners in business, so talking to business leaders about how they, as a corporation, see the role of compassion and taking a leadership position as a compassionate company. So that will build over time in terms of corporate partners, education partners, partners in science, in medicine, in the environment, in animal welfare, and so on and so forth. So we're just building the architecture right now so that someone visiting our site will be able to see these discussions and activities happening in these specific strata of activity.
Okay, so I'm kind of wondering now, you're kind of going, is this like a life's work you're doing, or you're going to be doing this for the rest of your life, or I'm just wondering how this is going to go forward with you.
Well, yes, I don't know how to answer that question specifically. I basically closed down my legal practice to put the seed funding into this. So up until now, the whole funding for this project has come from my own personal resources. But to me, that's not sustainable, and that's not giving enough Canadians the opportunity to participate and get involved. So what we're doing in 2012 is actually setting up a nonprofit organization, getting charitable status, and creating a board, a national board, so that we can actually formalize this Institute for Compassionate Learning, Compassionate Studies, and create a Canadian institute that focuses on compassionate learning and supporting compassionate activities. So it's if you ask me if it's a lifelong thing, I can't think of anything else more meaningful to do. And then something that helps not only Canada, but the rest of the world. So I guess the answer to your question simply is yes. But I think that's what we all want to do. I had a very interesting conversation when I first started this. I was meeting with a very, very senior person for an organization that I won't name, that basically represents itself as being a compassion organization. They have a huge website, huge following, and that sort of thing. And I went to speak to them about partnering to create, a national organization to focus on compassion and learning, and creating a culture of empathy and compassion. And they said, well, who are you? You're just one person. Where are your organizations and your corporate sponsors, and who's on your board? It was all about the who's who, and who are you if you don't have that around you? Well, what I've learned from my own activity, the intent that we spoke about earlier, and what I learned from the tour and meeting so many other Canadians, is you don't have to, it always comes down to the individual taking the initiative. If you wait for there to be a critical mass, if you wait for the corporate sponsors, it just doesn't happen. It's that fool on the hill that's willing to step out and just get busy and do something that lights a fire under somebody else's heart and gets them wanting to do something. And that's how you do it. One person at a time, one conversation at a time, one action at a time. And, what people don't realize is that, people may realize, is that when you do that, you actually feel better yourself. So this concept of mutuality is not just to help make other people's lives better. It actually enhances your own life and your own sense of well-being. So why wouldn't we want to do it the rest of our lives?
Yeah, so that's really kind of the vision I have as well. And I saw this kind of played out. We put up what we call the empathy tent at the local Berkeley Occupy. Yes. And we were there for just listening to people. And, like young people would come, and they would kind of, we'd have someone there that could kind of just listen and kind of be empathic, compassionate presence. And they would spend half an hour just talking about the troubles they'd had in their life. Like, well, I've been disconnected from my family, I'm having trouble just making connections and friends, kind of unemployed, traveling, kind of looking for my place in the world. And I think just that listening, kind of being there, you could just see that, you know, some of their stress was going down and they had some sense of connection.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're in a lot of pain and alienation and suffering, and just that sense of presence that someone was there. And so I see that as kind of like the real, you know, that at a national, international, world level, kind of that sense of presence that can really kind of solve a lot of the problems that we have in society.
I think so. There's nothing more, you know, sometimes it comes back to this this comment that was made to me earlier on about, you know, we don't need another shelter. We don't need another food bank. We want you to listen to us. Just be present for us in this moment and listen to what we have to say. And I think that is very, very important, a very important message to bring home in this discussion that we've had today, Edwin. The other thing that's happening in Canada that I'm very, very excited about is that in tying in with the Occupy movement, because we had hundreds of Occupy movements right across the country and continue to do so. I don't want to suggest that Occupy has gone away just because it's not being featured in the media. But the chair of the Compassion Ottawa is our national capital for Canada. And as we're striving to have Canada become the first nation in the world to be recognized as a compassionate nation, it's very exciting that this rabbi who served as a pastor for Occupy Ottawa is now taking up the compassion movement and trying to integrate the Occupy movement with the discussion about compassion. Because just, I think, as you've demonstrated, there really is a correlation between this sense of disparity between that 1 percentile of the population and the rest of us who don't do well, and the feeling that we live in a society that lacks compassion and empathy. And if we bring those two together to come up with a national direction that will address that, then I think we've got a very, very powerful movement that it will be difficult to ignore at a political level.
Yeah, so it's really about how to integrate empathy and compassion, I mean, very consciously within the Occupy movement.
Yes.
I see it as well, there's the energy is there, and it hasn't been really well articulated. And there is the potential for it to veer off into a more violent kind of a direction. For example, we had that in Oakland, you know, people breaking into the City Hall, you know, doing some damage there, as well as, you know, other confrontations. And so something we're just starting is part of the conference on how to build a culture of empathy and compassion, to have a sub-conference to bring in leaders and just participants from the Occupy movement to start dialoguing about how can we build a culture of empathy within the Occupy movement and with the Occupy movement.
I think that's a great idea. I've spoken to a number of government officials around, you know, and I've followed in the Canadian media when various representatives of Occupy movements have gone before, they've had the opportunity to speak before City Council, but then the City Council's had a hard time of understanding what it is exactly that they're hoping to achieve and what do they want. And I think collectively we can, just as we were talking about before, about identifying one project, just get one thing up and going and running to sort of demonstrate how we can work together to improve or to reduce the disparity, that sense of disengagement and disenfranchisement. If there's one thing we can do, then that will help move the movement. That will help get the movement in a direction that is well articulated and well focused, that city councils and businesses can get behind, and that for those who, you know, are working so valiantly in support of this movement to get the message across can actually feel as well that their efforts and their sacrifice are worthwhile and they're being heard. It's really about focus, as you know. There's a lot of things that aren't happening the way we would like to see, but if we just start with one, perhaps can agree to one project within each community and get going on that, then the city can rally around that, and then once that's up and running, okay, what's our next project? I think that is a really good way to get things going in a linear fashion that can be easily understood and embraced by various stakeholders.
What do you think about that one project being a conference on empathy and compassion? So that the city actually sponsors, that's what I was going to try to do here in Oakland. We're starting some dialogues in Oakland, and then would like to advocate for the city to actually sponsor a citywide conference on building a culture of empathy and compassion. So that kind of being the focal point, because that's starting the dialogue that can kind of open up.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's any right way or wrong way as long as there's a place where people can go. I love this idea that was put together in London called the City Symposium, because the government, the local municipal government, was very much in support of it. The space for the symposium, which was the central library, was donated to them, and it was a place where on a monthly basis they could have people speaking about ideas. They could share ideas about how to make the city better, or different ways to make the city more compassionate, or more engaging. Also, it would feature local artists and musicians. It's a very holistic. I use the word holistic, but it represented arts and culture as well as ideas, which brings in another important thing about compassion in art and in music. That another way that we can really get people involved and engaged in the discussion is by incorporating compassion into our arts and culture. So if you host an event, for instance, that is sponsored by your municipal government, also incorporate local arts and historical societies and that sort of thing to make, to bring in the idea and the concept of what compassion and empathy means to you visually or musically or in theater and dance.
So what happened is what happened? Your computer died, or?
Yes, I had to switch computers. The battery on my laptop died.
Okay, so we did want to kind of wrap up a little bit, but wanted to have a nice ending for this. So what I was saying was, I mean, I really enjoyed this dialogue, and I hope we can continue the dialogue and maybe do a panel discussion. But I was just wondering what kind of final thoughts you have, and what you any kind of points that you feel we could still cover for kind of winding up.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for all the work that you're doing, Edwin, because it's really exciting, and you're really doing what needs to be done, is having engaging people in very thoughtful and provocative discussion about how do we build a culture of empathy and compassion. And I will continue to try and do the same here, and I think by joining our efforts, we're actually helping build a more compassionate North America. I think it's just fantastic, this partnership between, this potential for a partnership between the United States and Canada that actually creates a world of empathy and compassion. If there isn't anything more motivational than that, I can't imagine what that is. So thank you for your time, and to anyone who's listening who'd be interested in assisting me in Canada, I would love to hear from them, and let's get talking and sharing some ideas to help create that culture of empathy and compassion that we want so dearly for everybody.
Well, thank you, Janet. And I've just, as I mentioned, I just thoroughly enjoyed this dialogue, and thank you so much.
Yeah, from C to E.
See, I have to go to work on that.
Nice talking to you, Edwin. Thanks.
Okay.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.